I will be. Am I on? Okay. Good afternoon, y'all. Welcome. Our panelists are getting to know each other. Welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Fife. I'm the Executive Director at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability USA. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much to America is All In for hosting us today at their pavilion. Oh, here comes one of my board members. I guess we better let him in. Welcome. Come on in. There are seats in the front. Well, we're super excited to be partnering up today on this session with the Bezos Earth Fund. Thank you so much, Amanda, for all of your work in this space over many, many decades. Really appreciate all you've done. Happy to be here. You know, we've been talking so much about local climate action the last couple of days with the Local Climate Action Summit. And we talk about cities as being the place where the rubber hits the road. Well, today, I think if that's the analogy we're going to use, we're also going to talk about the road, and we're going to talk about the community-based organizations that are actually doing the hard work in those communities. So very important to all of us. So I want to remind everyone that today at COP is the Health, Relief, Recovery, and Peace Day. So let's show a little peace to each other, and please do take care of yourself, your own health. So today we have two speakers who are community-based organization directors and two local elected officials. And our session, Greening American Cities, Opening Equitable Access to Nature for All, will discuss how humanity depends on nature to continue to live and thrive. Nature, of course, provides so many of the necessities of life, including clean water, clean air, our healthy food, and yet inequitable access to nature can really prevent all people from fairly benefiting from nature's benefits. So in this session, we will bring together these leading cities and community leaders that are safeguarding biodiversity and ensuring that nature's services are accessible to all people. So it's my pleasure to introduce now for some opening remarks. Oh, there she is. I thought she was going to be right here. She scared me. Welcome up Cecilia. Cecilia Martinez, Dr. Cecilia Martinez, is the Chief of Environmental and Climate Justice at the Bezos Earth Fund. She joined the Earth Fund after serving as the Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the White House Council on Environmental Quality in the Biden administration. And in this role, she has helped to develop and establish a whole of government approach to equitable climate and environmental policy. Before joining the Biden administration, Cecilia served as the Executive Director for the Center for the Earth, Energy, and Democracy. So welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you so much. And I am going to try to make this through without my glasses. Let's see how I can do. Well, thank you, everyone. This is a really exciting panel for us. At the Earth Fund, we directly connect our investments that protect the climate and preserve nature with those that benefit the most vulnerable communities. So there's no accident that my title is Chief of Environmental and Climate Justice. But let me tell you why that's so important to us. Globally, the World Health Organization data shows that 99% of the population breathe air that exceeds WHO guideline limits, with obviously low and middle income countries suffering the highest exposure. Of course, we know that internal to countries, those inequities also are highly exacerbated. Air quality is strongly connected to the health of our natural world and the Earth's climate because so many of the drivers of air pollution, including local air pollution, are also direct sources of the greenhouse gases that are changing our climate. In the US, and now we're recognizing worldwide, heat is becoming one of the leading causes of death. In the US alone, it is the heat change is projected to result in 100,000 additional heat-related deaths per year by 2100. Again, very likely those with low income and those in communities of color. As of September, the U.S. hit the worst level of hunger in decades, with 54 million Americans having no reliable access to food. These are the problems and the challenges that face us today, in addition, and they are interlinked with climate change. But we know we cannot tackle these issues as if they are disconnected from each other. They are all interconnected and interrelated, and also all too often are the result of the social and economic inequality that has plagued our history. While urban areas occupy less than 1% of the Earth's land surface, they house more than half its people, and it is estimated that by 2050, 68% of the global population will live in cities. Today, almost 3/4 of fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions emanate from cities globally. In addition, because of inadequate maintenance and the increasing impacts of climate change, urban infrastructure systems can increase the magnitude of natural hazards such as flooding and urban heat island effects. For all these reasons, nature-based solutions and green spaces present a critical and important set of overall climate solutions. They create wildlife habitats, preserving natural areas within a city. They can regulate air and water pollution. Properly planned, landscapes can help achieve reductions in temperature, reducing urban heat island effects. They can promote urban natural water systems. They can promote climate resilience. Green spaces can help to reduce the risk of flooding in periods of heavy rainfall. And of course, they can support climate mitigation. Urban forests help to mitigate climate change by capturing and storing atmospheric CO2 and by reducing energy needs for heating and cooling. In the contiguous U.S., urban trees store over 708 million tons of carbon, approximately 12.6 of annual CO2 emissions. This is an important solution that we cannot ignore. However, as I mentioned before, we also know that these green spaces are distributed in a highly unequal manner across cities. This is why the Bezos Earth Fund has invested in the initiative called Greening America's Cities. It's an innovative new initiative that puts the power and the money in the hands of communities who know best what type of green solutions they need to address. We have invested $50 million this year, and we are committing $400 million through 2030 to the establishment of green spaces in our country's most vulnerable communities. It is a model of how to build an ecosystem of support to create these green spaces whereby no community should be left behind. Now, all of that comes from the left brain, the mind part of what it means to have green spaces in the U.S. Now let me talk a little bit about the heart. As we were creating this initiative, one of the things that kept coming back to me from my own personal history was my remembrances of nature. I didn't grow up in the city. However, my remembrance of nature are so often intertwined with the intimate recollections of family and community. The endless search for the four-leaf clover with my clans of cousins, the walks with my grandmother and my grandfathers where they shared their memories of their youthful tree climbing and fishing and hiking days, or simply the family celebrations in the mountains behind my home. And everyone has their own unique, joyful experience with nature. Greening America's Cities represents our commitment to ensure that these experiences continue to be part of our community life and into the future, especially in urban neighborhoods where nature is often much too distant for its community members. The hopeful news is that we now recognize green spaces are places where families can foster and grow their social relationships. They are parks where families can play together, They are nature trails where families can learn about the earth and its beauty with each other. They are urban gardens where people work together to bring life-sustaining food to their community. And they are places of reflection to nurture and support emotional health. The use of green spaces in communities is as varied, and their beneficial possibilities are as diverse as the communities that we help to support. This is, again, why the Bezos Earth Fund has made this commitment to creating the Greening America's Cities initiative and to investing in organizations that are part of the backbone of community life. We also believe that climate change solutions cannot be divorced from equity and justice. So we have started with these investments in 5 communities across the country, and we'll be supporting the development of future green spaces across the country. On today's panel, you'll hear directly from 2 of the organizations we are supporting about the incredible work they have been doing within and being driven by their local communities. And of course, from 2 mayors who are leaders in this city, in their cities, in moving equitable green spaces. This is a new way of doing things for the Bezos Earth Fund, and I would venture to say this is a new way of doing things for philanthropy as a whole. But we think it's a critical shift and one we hope to build on into many of our initiatives moving forward. So thank you for this time.
Thank you, Cecilia. As you were talking about your memories as a child, I was thinking about a lilac bush that was outside of my bedroom window. And I couldn't wait for spring when that would start to bloom. It was just an intoxicating sort of smell. So we're going to move to a couple of questions, first for our elected leaders. And so I'd like to invite Mayor May to begin. Mayor May is the mayor of Fremont, California, in the Bay Area of California. And Mayor May, please start off by letting us know anything that you'd like to know, like us to know about yourself, and tell us a little bit about how your city is ensuring this equitable access to nature and green spaces.
Sure. So first off, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And whoops, we're recording. Is this already on? It is? Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As you can see, I have a mom voice, so I didn't even need the microphone. But I could definitely relate to the idea of enjoying trees. I grew up in Pennsylvania, where I grew up next to a wildlife preserve, but now I live in California. And when we talk about equity and access, it really is important. I'm proud to see so many of my fellow mayors here today, and I know some of us have joined the 10-minute pledge, which is ensuring that our communities can walk and have access. So when it comes to looking at diversity and access too, we are also one city which is the 4th largest in population, the 2nd largest in land size, over 92 square miles, and giving people access to this recreation has never been more important than these last couple years. It's about physical health, it's about mental health, and so having that ability to have people reach that is important. We look at social equity, we look at the fact that when we do our housing plans, can we ensure that we have access to that? And even repurposing land. Part of our city's history used to be in farm and agriculture. And when some of those have closed, we have repurposed those to give greater access. For example, in our North Ardenwood area, we have the Dig Deep Farms, which is allowing us to have a food hub. So allowing it to deliver and ensuring that people who may not have had the chance to do farming have access to that. We also have local ecology and agriculture, Fremont, and having things like even with our senior centers, which we now have called Age Well Centers. My son says it's just planning for my own future. But when we do that, having spaces and food boxes, because it allows people the chance to relax and to see how they can make that contribution. Right now, one of our key projects that we're focusing on is a community center by Lake Elizabeth, and we're hoping that when we talk about equity and access, we have some of the most innovation in terms of manufacturing. We have a small manufacturer in our city that some people have heard of, which is Tesla. But when it comes to other areas too, with biomedical and these types of new technologies, people may not know that we have the most clean tech hardware manufacturing in the United States. So when it comes to lithium batteries and other different types of opportunities and greening that, we want people to be able to play and understand what types of skills there are. We wanted to even upskill and during the pandemic get people access so that they can get jobs in the future that will allow them to be able to live, not just fish, but fish well and be able to adapt to the future. So those are just some of the things that we're working on. The other thing that I'm very proud of is that we're talking about engaging our youth. And we also have a Fierce Club, which is Fremont. I'm trying to remember all the different acronym letters. But basically they do everything from food to cooking to different challenges. And this is important. As we're building our cities, we're updating a lot of things like our master park plan, which is the first time we've updated in 25 years. We have 63 parks in our city. We have 7 of the regional parks. And in fact, we have the only campground in the Bay Area, an urban campground. And right now we have campgrounds for RVs and tents. In the future, we'll have yurt camping. So it's kind of glamping for the millennials. And looking at ways that we can incorporate that space is some of the things that we hope to share. And so I'm very excited to listen to some of my fellow panelists today and to learn. That's what I think is the best thing when we come here, is I'm not ashamed to reuse, rinse, recycle, and reuse your ideas.
Yes,
So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor May. And of course, Tesla has a camping mode, so maybe you can take those Teslas off to your urban camping area. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage from Boise, Idaho, Mayor McLean.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the Bezos Fund and ICLEI for hosting this today, and it's great to be at the America All-In platform. As a mayor that early in my time joined the America All-In Challenge, it's super exciting to be here. I want to talk about a couple things. And Celia, I really appreciate your story, and it actually got me thinking about home. It made me really want to go home because we live in a place, and I truly believe that when you are connected to the place in which you live, and we live in a city that's in between a river that actually makes noise because there are rocks and it's shallow and there are fish, and now we have mussels that have returned because it's so clean, and foothills to the Rocky Mountains that you can access and then go for hundreds of miles on foot or on bike. And when you're grounded to the place in which you live, and you create opportunities for people to connect to the people they live near, you have a much richer community and social capital that carries you forward and keeps your city safe now and into the future. And so, I actually got my work in politics from the advocacy side. When I was 24, I led an effort to pass a levy in our city to then set aside open space above our city and our foothills. And it was something that everybody said couldn't be done. 500 people showed up to volunteer over the course of 4 months. We took a poll that had us at 40%, and one was 60%. And it was a game changer for our community. I didn't know it then, but because it got us thinking about who we could be and how important access to the outdoors was, and what we wanted our city to look like in the future, and importantly, what people could do to make it happen. We passed another one 10 years later. I've committed as part of the Beautiful Challenge by 2030 to have invested $30 million in open space. So we will, between now and when I leave this office, have another levy of $10 million, not just to protect open space, but parks throughout the city, as well as river access and habitat preservation, both in our city and, I actually anticipate looking at the headwaters as well, like how you protect the river running through it. And we have a goal, set a goal 3 years ago, after I became mayor, of making sure that every kid in our city could walk safely to parks or open space. And the safe is key as an urban person, because you want your city to be safe, but you want your kids to be able to walk safely. And so that means you have to think about pathways. We've developed a pathway plan of 112 miles that probably take us 20 years to set aside, but along between farmlands and the foothills, along those canals, ditches, laterals, and drains, you got to have good urban core neighborhoods with safe sidewalks to get your kiddos safely to parks in all neighborhoods. And we're using that metric, and it actually makes us invest in places that weren't invested in historically. So we've got maps. We know who can't walk to a park within 10 minutes. We know also where there are safety issues, and it's guided the purchases of land that we've made since our council passed that to create parks of the future. As part of the America the Beautiful pledge, we also said we would take our parks and natural areas and make sure that about 30% of those, because the 2030 play, would be natural areas. So we're taking parts of our parks and creating natural spaces that are native, that allows people to experience less of a developed park and more of a natural area and what you would expect in Boise, and that does so much more. We have taken land, like thinking about flyover land that can't be industrial land, but we've had to buy homes because it's under the airport flight zone, and developed urban ag, working with refugee organizations to then have land so that those families can farm and then sell their foods. And we're looking at food hubs as well. We're using ARPA dollars to develop food hubs through the local farmers markets. At the end of the day, I'd say that this work is really important because it builds on the legacy we have as a city based in place and with community engagement, but really at the same time allows us to meet our climate goals because we know where we have a goal of doubling our tree canopy by 2030, but we've mapped where those trees need to be. And you can imagine the neighborhoods that don't have them. They're the underinvested neighborhoods, and that is guiding the work that we're doing with community groups to invest in and plant the trees in those areas that need it in the same way that our 10-minute safe walk to a park is guiding where we purchase parkland. There's a lot of exciting work happening. Love hearing what Fremont's doing. Look forward to hearing what you all are doing because community groups are a big part of how we get this done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor McLean, and what a great story about your advocacy and how volunteerism and community participation got you where you were trying to get to. So that's great. So we're going to turn now to our community-based organizations, and I'd like to ask Sandra to go first. Sandra is a lifelong resident of Delaware. Now get this, she is a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I'm envious. You look great as a great-grandmother. And so please tell us more about the work that you're doing. We'd love to hear how you're approaching this issue of greening and equitable spaces in your community.
Good afternoon, and thanks to you all for having me. It's such a pleasure to be in the midst of people who are doing things, and to listen to the mayors let us know that our visions are possible. The vision that we have for our communities are actually possible. It's hard to talk about our community without realizing that there is a history that led us to where we are. And I came from a community, a small neighborhood that was situated in the midst of other neighborhoods that were not very friendly. The neighborhood that I came from was one that was built for African American World War II veterans because during the period of segregated housing, there was no housing for our veterans who were returning. My father happened to be one of those veterans, and so we were lucky enough to be in this community. Now, the community was unlike many other communities because it was totally two-parent families, because veterans married and brought their wives and their children. So there were lots of children, and there were these two-parent families, and we were encircled by hostile communities. So we were like an enclave, and we had to depend upon ourselves, and we took care of each other, and ultimately we had a school, and our school was populated by people who lived in our community because the community was totally integrated with white-collar and blue-collar workers. So we had lots of role models for those of us who didn't know, and it was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up. Well, with desegregated housing came the opportunity to expand to other communities, and that resulted in what we know as white flight. And as a result of white flight, then other housing became available to our community, and ultimately, this community, this area, this Route 9 corridor became predominantly African American. And that's where my story began. It was a story of disinvestment. It was a story of allowing industry to move in close to our communities, polluting industry, so that there was very little monitoring of it. So naturally, our environment became quite polluted. Well, there are those of us who chose to stay here because there was such a great legacy from this community. And I went off only to go to college and then to go to graduate school. And that gave me the opportunity to see that there were so many other communities that did not have this situation and so many others that did. And the fact that they were usually divided by socioeconomics. And so I came back to my community. And when I finally retired, and age is one of those things, it gives you the opportunity to live through generations and to know the history. So I came back, and when I retired, I'm a retired educator. When I retired, I spent my time advocating for my community that had now grown from this singular little neighborhood to a whole Route 9 area of 12 neighborhoods. The interesting part was that each of these neighborhoods had, most of them had an embedded park. But because of the disinvestment of government, the parks had grown, overgrown. Many of them were littered. Some of them were havens for drug distribution and all of the other kinds of issues that confront many low-income communities. Well, we could not have that. So we set out to make a change, and we worked very hard. Our initial bit of work was to take over the neighborhood swimming pool, where we changed it from being a place that was a place where you would not want your kids to get in the water to one that was really an oasis. And government, local county government, allowed us to work this swimming pool, and then they began to support us. And after a while, they began to invest money. And then the pool became a place where everybody wanted to come, and the county then put us on their website and said this was a place that people should come to visit. And then county parks, county camps started using the pool, and the pool was an oasis in our community. Well, if this worked with the parks, we figured this should work everywhere else. But the problem that we had was resources. Oh my gosh, you cannot imagine what it was like when we received a grant from the Bezos Earth Fund. You just cannot imagine, because typically what happens is that those at the top determine what should happen at the bottom. Now, they don't usually know what's going on at the bottom, but they have this plan, and everyone is supposed to fit into it. Well, along comes the grant, and oh my gosh, the change that it made already, and we've only had it for a short period of time. But let me tell you some of the things that happened. We had neighborhoods where people had never been allowed to go out of their back gate because they didn't know that it could happen. It was so overgrown with trees and overgrowth. And so when they had problems with the sewer and they contacted the county says, oh, we feel really bad about that, but we can't get in there. It's overgrown. And that's not our job. And they contacted utility companies about down lines. And the utility company said, we will be glad to come in and correct your lines, but we can't get in there. It's all overgrown. So we get this grant, and within a few weeks, it's all cleared out. And neighbors are coming out, and they're saying, we're so thankful, we didn't even know this was out here. And so now the county can get in and clean the sewers, because there were people who were having very waste coming up through their sewers because there was nothing that could be done. But now there's something that can be done. We have partnered with our county, and because one of the problems that we had is that high unemployment. So we determined that we would talk with the county about having us use workforce development to take over these parks, to maintain the parks. And we can provide then employment for young men who typically cannot be employed by agencies because many of them have a felony in their background, so they can't pass the background check. So here we are now. We're able to employ them. They are so happy. They're involved, but we haven't stopped with that. What we have determined is that they should develop their own company to do this kind of thing. And in developing their own company, they can then bid on jobs that have to do with horticulture. We've partnered with the local horticultural society, and they're going to train them. And then another person came in, and she's actually going to allow them to get college credit for some of the training that they've gotten. So now we've opened a pathway to careers. And we have invested in our community, and we have people who are going to do a wonderful job at maintaining the parks because it's their park. And so we look at all of these things and we say, well, why is it that nobody thought of this before? Well, typically with grants, you know how they come. They tell you what you have to use them for. So if they tell you that you've got to use them for kids and cleaning out the sewers doesn't fit with their idea of the kids, then you can't use the grant for that. But Bezos came along and said, you can use it in the way you see fit. And so we're using it in the way we see fit, and it's having an immediate impact on our community. And so it's just a delight to see these kinds of things happening, and this is a different model. Because with this model, the solution is coming from the bottom, where people actually can make the difference. And so that's my story, and I'm glad to tell it.
Wow. All right, Anton, you gonna try to top that one?
I don't know if I'm going to top Mama San, who I've adopted in the last weeks. But my name is Anton Seals Jr. I'm the lead steward of Grow Greater Inglewood on the south side of Chicago. And we started this organization as a response. Really didn't even start as an organization. We started as an effort to make sure there were going to be black folks in an all-black community doing farming on vacant spaces. We thought it was just odd. Well, you had well-intended organizations trying to come in farming that were all white, but this didn't make sense because of who the community was made up of, mostly black people who had migrated from the South, who farmed. So that kind of disconnect, and this I think is before we even have, which is much more commonplace now, the language of racial equity and racial justice, which is much more commonplace now. So 10 years ago, it was just burgeoning. I come to this work from policy. I got involved because I worked for a member of Congress, Congressman Bobby Rush. I'm from Chicago, so that whole scene, Barack Obama, Bobby Rush, that era. So I worked during that time when we elected this first president. So, and part of what we were struggling with was this disconnecting around public health, around the chronic health diseases that we were seeing high and really concentrated. Chicago, if you don't know, is one of America's most segregated cities. And so you can see this kind of the kind of social determinants of health and the impact that it has in communities because we're so segregated. And so that's where a lot of the work around the what we now, which is a terrible still moniker around food deserts, was birthed out of that. And so that was a lot of our work that became national work that Congressman Rush kind of championed to the Congressional Black Caucus. So, and the farmers had finally made that kind of, the large farming and food community had started to make that connection around urban settings as urban agriculture started to really mature. And now that's about 15, this is 07. And so that kind of stuck. For me, I come as a kind of multidisciplinary kind of person, so I'm a walking intersectional. Intersectionality is now a whole thing, but that's always what I've done. So storytelling and film and engagement, organizing. I'm an organizer. I'm an entrepreneur. And so when we started this organization, myself and who's now our state rep, Sonia Harper. Big shout out to Sonia Harper, who's our state rep, and she actually chairs the Agriculture Committee for the state of Illinois now. But we started as a coalition because there was going to be a Whole Foods that was going to be moving into Inglewood. It is now since closed. And so part of this issue around what we've dealt with is around tax. What came out of the Farm Bill was giving credits to try to attract. So it became a business solution, which we knew was going to be always an experiment that will expire. Because when there was no financial incentive, that frame would not be able to exist in certain neighborhoods. It was a great attempt, but that's kind of how we started. And from there, I would just say what we've done over the last several years, we kind of incorporated ourselves and then had to stand this organization up. Sonia became a state rep, and so I had to make a decision to lean in to say, as an organizer, you don't always go deep. Sometimes you are able to knit things together and then pass the ball forward. But in this case, it was something that we knew that we had to keep moving forward. So Grow Greater Inglewood has since kind of, grown and expanded. So we work at this intersection around urban ag, converting a preponderance of vacant lots in this one neighborhood, probably one of the biggest neighborhoods that has that amount of vacant lots that the city owns. So when you talk about divestment, and this is the poster child of American kind of divestment when you think of the kind of things that you hear about Chicago. This is the neighborhood that a lot of those things were happening and have happened. And then we also work in this section around climate and climate resiliency because of our work around the Inglewood Nature Trail. And so you had this intersection of black farmers, regenerative agriculture, looking at not just regenerative agriculture, but the whole kind of slew of it, and then a network approach in community. When you're dealing with, poor black communities that we represent, the other part of that conversation was that we've always been very resilient. So this language that I'm here, all the way in Dubai around resiliency, the language of this whole sector is sometimes disconnected from the people in our community. Because they are grappling with a bevy of all of these things. So they're not, nature is not pulled apart. And so part of our work is to, really interrupt that thinking. Part of our work is to submit to our community that we deserve beautiful spaces. And by that, we're saying that, this can't be necessarily commodified. Right, because part of the issue is the commodification of the things to scale up. That's part of the big issue of what we're dealing with around climate change, is because we keep trying to push things in a vacuum or an equation that does not really think about the kinds of ways people address those in that culture. So that's been a lot of our work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, today when you ask these beautiful questions. But, we are working in that intersection where we have farmers and we have this beautiful nature trail. And now what that is kind of really grown and blossomed into is an agro-eco district, looking at the complete community with a larger vision around how do we sustain ourselves? How do we keep our cultural identity in this community, right? So that folks who have been leaving because of the kind of lack of access would want to be here, and that's very easily said, but very difficult to actually do. So that's a little bit about Grow Greater Inglewood and myself.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Anton. Yeah, I'm sure we can all imagine a vacant lot in our community, right? A swimming pool that's in need of repair. So thank you so much for the work that you've done, and thank you for your investment in those communities. That's great. So we're going to give our mayors a little bit of an opportunity to respond. So now that you've heard these two stories from community leaders, what do you think the role of philanthropy could be in a community like yours? Let's go to Mayor McLean first.
Sure. I was thinking a lot about that too when you all were both talking. I mean, I think there's a big role for philanthropy to play, a bigger role than they had, and so there's a lot of opportunity. And when I think about all the work that we're doing right now as cities, we've had unprecedented investment and opportunities for grants from the federal government. At some point, that will dry up, right? The opportunities will go away. And yet we've launched these plans, we've built capacity, we know what we can and will do, but we'll need partners to make it happen. And it can be partners that are philanthropists and foundations willing to fund directly into cities. Ideally, it would be partners in with neighborhood groups and other NGOs that could help do the work side by side with others in community within a city. So there's the plans that we've developed for long-term resilience and climate strategies that get back to really the kind of greening of cities and nature. There's also, I think, there's a real need to create strategies, I think it sounds like Bezos is, for places that link community groups, neighborhood associations, city plans that have come from community engagement, like deep community engagement, with the funds to make those things happen. And then the other thing, I think of it often, but then thought about it when the gentleman from Inglewood was talking about, we lost somebody to be in the state senate, and then what do you do now? So it's the investing in people, not just the people that are running the organization so that you've got the organization that can do the work on the ground, but I think it's super important to figure out how you invest in a farm team so these organizations aren't running for the next person when somebody moves on to something, in young folks with regard to advocacy training, because a government can only do so much, but the government needs organizations to back them up and push them to do more, and then keep them safe when they do it, right? So then how do we have folks that know how to advocate effectively, know how to organize effectively, and can make those links throughout their careers, either in nonprofit organizations or in neighborhood groups, to support then the work that cities want to do and push us when we don't have the right leadership to do what needs to be done, or help us do more if you have somebody that's willing to do it. I find that often that when I was young, I was an organizer, was invested in a lot by the LCV community. I learned how to advocate. I learned how to do campaigns. I learned how to negotiate, to work in the legislature. I did these things. And if people and I was lucky, right? I was in the conservation community, so an organization continued to invest. There are a lot of foundations outside of, or there's a lot of people outside of the conservation community that do this good work that don't receive the same investments from a people perspective because there's not the same systems set up for that. And so the more that can be done side by side with organizations that are doing good work, and ideally with cities and government structures that want to do more, I think the better off we are in being able to create that systems approach for impact.
Great, thank you. Mayor May, over to you.
Sure. So one of the things I forgot to mention earlier is that we are also the 6th largest Asian city. And I think that in this moment, there's some of the fear and apprehension, I also wanted to mention to people that sometimes people think that's a monolithic model minority, and it's not the case. There are many different groups within the Asian community. And engaging organizations, whether it's ethnic or faith-based, we also have done things like working with our Handicapable, so Friends of Children with Special Needs, and working with these different groups. For example, the Dawoodi Bara have worked with us, and this past year we are in 26 years at one of the green cities, or tree cities, and we planted over 800 trees. We did an update in a tree survey, as well as a master plan that cataloged over 75,000 trees in our city, and it tells you the different types. We also don't want it just to be a catalog. We also want to train people, and we would focus on looking at replanting trees, making sure that they're native, that they're drought resistant, that we're focusing on even classes where we had our students come up with a coursework and having classes on how to maintain these trees and how to look at some of the planning for that. I think that when it comes to environmental and adoption of public transit, our city is one that, much like many other cities, are used to using their cars, but making the focus on safe routes to school. We implemented over 500 safety plans with over 42 schools and 32,000 kids in 2 years. And so when you see that, and because of the pandemic, we could see people utilizing that better. The other thing is with Green Challenge, we've been focused, just like every other city, on the environmental impacts. We've had rolling blackouts, we've had orange skies, and we have to worry about earthquakes and fires. So we've also utilized microgrids and be able to support our public safety, our fire and police. So in case of a natural disaster, we can go off grid. But to the question that you asked earlier about access and I know I joked a little bit about earlier about Tesla and others, but we have so much manufacturing and there's so much of this emerging market. And one of the things that I think is very important is to have this program where you can have apprenticeship and earn and learn. So we've taken people who have been impacted by COVID and be able to have paid internships at $18 an hour, and at the same time partner with our local community college, something that may take a 20-week class. We've been able to condense it down to 10 weeks. But at the same time, some of these companies have really stepped up, whether it's Bloom Energy, Tesla, Evolve, different companies have stepped up to also provide things like healthcare, not just for the student, but also for their family. Things like tuition credits and guaranteed jobs when they can get out, so that we can help change the trajectory. I think so many companies are expanding and changing right now, and I came out in a period where I was telling people, students before, I was demonstrating IBM wheel writers, and they asked me, what was that? And I said it was a typewriter, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So I feel like, okay, I must be in a different era. But looking at how technology is constantly, Moore's Law, evolving, and people don't know what the career paths are and opportunities, but if you can have paid internships that also are partnering with community colleges or other ways to ensure accreditation, ensure things like jobs when they come out, and tuition credits to allow them to continue. One of the things I'm very proud of, and I just completed the fourth cohort with Tesla by chance a couple weeks ago, they partnered with our community college. So any of their employees who want to continue for class and coursework, they will pay for that. And so these are things that you have to get commitment from. I was telling people that growing a community, growing a city, it's not just about building a house, it's about building a home, it's about having the ability to live, work, worship, and be able to relate to one another in a way that grows like a tree. You have the foundation, and you have the roots, and you have to have all, I won't say fertilizer, but funding and other things that would help ensure that it continues to thrive and grow. So we definitely would look forward to this partnership and anything we can do to expand in that area.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've heard from two excellent leaders here, obviously, in terms of community engagement. Anton, let's start with you. If you were to advise a city or a county leader who wants to be more effective at working with community organizations, give us your kind of top 2-3 suggestions.
Okay, and philanthropy.
Yes.
So I have to say also, because I chair a foundation, so I think my recommendation there is if you are on a board, a trustee, you should definitely be leaning in around, particularly in this time, and doing what Bezos is actually modeling, the Earth Fund at least is modeling, which is funding direct frontline organizations, right? This issue around capacity, the language around impact is flawed, because the board of trustees are the ones who are, or the board, are the ones who are making the decisions, but they are often the ones who are most removed from those communities that have to live with those decisions. It's a really flawed measurement. So I think we have to look at the commitment level, right? That these kind of issues that are systemic are not going to go, they take large amounts of dollars. But I think sometimes when you talk about large amounts of dollars, that scares people, because they may have, in their minds, a finite amount of resource. But it's using your corpus in a way that really partners with communities around issues, and leaning in where there is not necessarily this return on investment, right? Because many foundations model the same kind of business apparatus. Why you should be doing that is because when you think about the kind of work that we're doing in Chicago, a lot of that work has been driven by community-based organizations, right? So we have even moved in terms of our politics. It's an interesting space, and I won't, I'll spare you all the details around that, but we've pushed to get a food equity council. We're doing community wealth building. These are huge things that are being driven not from bureaucrats, but from community. So this level of co-governance, right, of what that really looks like. Because when you create a policy, or a policy is created, it's usually done because there's systems. But oftentimes what ends up happening is that's the power dynamic that's there. And I would encourage those who are in government, because it is frightening to lean in, because you're giving away some of that power. But in order to have that kind of deeper impact, you've got to push to the unknown, right? So what I would say in terms of where foundations can really step up in terms of climate change and all the work, that there's going to be a doubling, tripling down. I just, being here is like, how much, this city didn't even exist 25 years ago, right? So there was a commitment by this government to say we wanted to do something bold and brash, and that's what's missing. And I think sometimes, and they had a model, I think, that's like, well, we want to attract more visitors. So it's always about this kind of revenue. But I think that what we see on the ground in communities like where I come from is where all those things had already left and left behind, and so it just has been there 30 years. So, and this was the trail that I'm working with is a connector trail that was abandoned 60 years ago. But we still sit between two of North America's largest railroad companies, Norfolk Southern and CSX. But in between there, we have some of the highest unemployment numbers in the city. So something is ajar around how cities, philanthropy, government think about solutions. And often it's because you have to have people in those spaces who are in those communities, actually in those spaces helping make the decisions. What's usually happening is that the people who have the resource are not, they're trying to be of goodwill, but by not ceding that power away, they actually are creating another layer of minutia sometimes, of not allowing for things to emerge, the innovations to emerge, because you can't really innovate where there's so much fear. So I think that that's my 3 cents to, government, philanthropy, is that you've got to be able to, especially now more than ever, because this crisis that we're dealing with is not going to take these kind of small baby steps. They have to be bold. And sometimes you, quote unquote, may lose, but that means someone may win, right? So that's what I would, kind of bracket in terms of my 3 cents.
Thank you. Great. How about you, Sandra?
Am I on? Okay. I would echo what Antoine has said, but I'd also like to just put it simply. Community needs to be represented at the table where the goals are being set. Philanthropists need to fund organizations for a longer period of time. 1 year will not get it. Nothing is changed in a year. Nothing is changed really in 2 years, but that's better than a year. And actually, ideally, it would be like a 5-year grant with benchmarking and with support. Because what we actually need is not the vision. We don't need philanthropists to have the vision for our community. We need our community to have that vision. That's why they need to be at the table. And then we need to resource them. We need to resource them in a way that we're providing not only funds, but also expertise. Because many times at the local level, you have a great idea, but you don't have the expertise to implement it. And sometimes you just need somebody there to say, this is the way you go. These are the connections you have to make. And let the person go at it. We have so much potential in our community. I see it all the time. But there's no access. Access needs to be provided. And we need to look at what will the model be going forward. Clearly, the model that has been used is flawed. Nothing is coming of it. We are still in the same bad situations that we always were. So we have to step back and say, well, what is it that we're doing wrong? What do we need to change? And if we incorporate our community, if we stop funding in silos and we fund holistically so that there is a whole approach to a problem solving, that sectors of the community, different sectors, bring their expertise or their experience to solving the problem, and not having one person or one group have all the answers, and not having one-upsmanship, but having us all come together to resolve a problem that we see exists, then we'll move forward. Some people are going to have to bring resources. funding. Some will bring expertise. But the majority of the movement forward will be on the backs of the people who are in the community, who are willing to do the work, who have the commitment, who have the lived experience. Let's blend it all together. It makes the difference.
Yeah. Wise counsel. I have a request for one question from the audience. We have one, one moment. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sean Patterson, Howard, Mayor of the City of Mount Vernon.
Can we get a microphone?
Sean Patterson Howard, Mayor of the City of Mount Vernon, but also 15 years as the CEO for the YMCA and 25 years as a social worker, right? And so the one thing that I feel, the connection that needs to be made between philanthropies, governments, and the communities are that philanthropies and governments have to trust the people they say they want to help. We use buzzwords around capacity and capacity building, and oftentimes we shuttle the money through larger organizations who have become very detached from the needs of the community, saying they have the infrastructure. So we have to help the organizations that have boots on the ground, who have the passion, and who have skin in the game to build the capacity. But not only do we need to invest in the direct projects, but we also have to invest in the green and the blue workforce development. Because once you invest in those communities, if we're not building the workforce to maintain it, then the monies that we're sending into those communities are going out to experts who don't live in that community, and the money is not being recycled. So as we do things in sustainable projects and parkland and food insecurity, we also have to make sure we're coupling workforce development so that those people who live in the community and who will benefit from the project will also benefit from the economic development that comes along with the monies that are being invested.
Great. Great comment. Thank you so much. Cecilia, can we just ask you to give us like 1 minute? What did you hear today that was new, that you'd like to kind of highlight and pull out a little bit?
Well, that was new. I think what I heard today was actually a reaffirmation of all the sort of how we move forward from the past models that may have been helpful for some communities, but not all communities. And I think just this example of mayors and community organizations speaking the same language, speaking to the same issues, I have to say is where I think hope is, that that we are able to actually have a conversation today, whereas probably 20, 30 years ago this conversation would have been very, very different. And for us at the Bezos Earth Fund, it's exactly what each one of you have said. We have to be listeners, we have to hear what city mayors, city staff are being confronted with, what the challenges are, because after all, they are our local governments and they are the ones that are going to move things forward. We have to listen and hear to communities, to community organizations who represent the core, as Ms. Smithers has said. And, I think we have to build networks and build an ecosystem, provide the resources so that those conversations can happen in very fruitful and hopeful ways, because in the past, I think a lot of these conversations have been crisis-driven, or they have been in ways that have been very competitive or conflictual. And this is a perfect example, I think, of how we can turn that around. Not that there aren't going to be problems, there will be, but once you build these relationships, that problem solving can happen in a much more fruitful way. So I really appreciate all the comments that the panelists have made. It's been wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you, Anton, Sandra, for the work that you're doing in your communities. Amazing. I'm really inspired. Thank you, mayors, for being here with us today, and thank you to the Bezos Earth Fund for their investment here. Let's give them all some applause. Can we get a photo of our panel? Awesome.